what you don't realize, the news is giving you the wild fantasy and imagination. And the movies and the TV shows and the music videos are where you're finding the truth of what really goes on in the world and who really runs things embedded into the narrative. They do it cryptically, they do it in coded form, in symbolic form, but it's their way of communicating what's really going on. And they see the masses, the general people out there like you and me, they see us as spiritually profane and ignorant.
Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Raising the Bar, and you guys are in for a treat today. I'm really lucky to have this gentleman on. His name's Mark Devlin. He's a former DJ and now he's a researcher, activist, presenter, public speaker. He's doing some tremendous work, and there's a lot of parallels between his work and myself. And uncovering some of the stuff in the music industry, the links to the military industrial complex, MK Ultra, mind control, all that kind of stuff. How you doing, Mark?
Hello, John. Good to be with you. I'm sure we're going to have a stimulating conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you seem to be doing a lot of good stuff, a lot of great research. You've got a similar background to me. I was a DJ, not on your level, but I was a pirate radio DJ. So,
Oh, cool.
and garage music back in the mid to late 90s.
Oh, nice.
And then actually had my own electro rave in the mid 2000s in SE1 club in London, but not quite, yeah, not
Wow.
quite your global stardom, but
Well, we should have a separate conversation about all of that. That sounds right
yeah.
up my street.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot that goes on just in that world, for sure.
Mm.
But then, so your story is that you came from that, that side, the music side. You also, similar to me, kind of, I read a lot of the David Icke stuff. My awakening, I think, happened in about 2011. Funny enough, 11/11 was my wake up on that exact day. I remember
All
it well. I
right.
was actually doing a Vipassana meditation retreat, and someone mentioned it to me, and then that just kind of opened everything up. But yeah, so how did it go from for you music to, obviously kind of the darker aspects of the music industry then? Was there a tipping point? Was there actually like a point at which that it will happen for you?
Well, it was a gradual process. There wasn't a single moment of epiphany.
Mm,
So, my background is that I was a club and radio DJ. I did radio first, actually, before I got going in the clubs. And it was all legal radio, it's FM radio stations. Sadly, I can't claim to have ever been on a pirate. I'm sure that would have been fun, but it was all legal stuff. And then I got involved in club DJing and I played stuff that was in the sort of black urban music field. So it was R&B, hip hop, reggae, that sort of stuff and DJ'd up and down the UK, got quite a few gigs internationally, and I was loving life and having fun for many years. Fun, remember that?
yeah.
Um,
Yes.
then I got involved in researching all this stuff, as you say, and
Yeah.
it was a gradual process which was kickstarted by the books of David Icke and
Mm,
also the first Zeitgeist movie, which really opened my eyes up to hidden aspects of this world and who really runs things. So I threw myself into researching the true nature of the music industry. And if you ever do that and you're prepared to go wherever it takes you, no boundaries, no limitations, you do eventually come across some very unsavory subject areas like Satanism and the world of the dark occult, ritualistic practices, including, unfortunately, ritual sacrifice. And then you get into very murky areas like pedophilia, satanic ritual abuse, and trauma based mind control. And I'm sure your research overlaps with mine in those kind of areas. And straight away, there are some red flags there because music and entertainment is supposed to be all about having fun and enjoying yourself, right? I've got a presentation which I take out on the road, which is titled Music's Military and Mind Control Connections. And I always start it by saying, straight away, there's cause for concern there because why should there be any connections whatsoever between music and the military and mind control? But unfortunately, where you find aspects of the military and expressions of it, military intelligence, so called, which is actually an oxymoron, you often find mind control, trauma-based mind control of the MK Ultra variety. Where you find that, you often find Satanism and dark occult ritualistic stuff. And where you find that, unfortunately, you often find pedophilia as well. You don't get one without the other, it seems. So yes, you need to have a pretty strong demeanor about you if you're really going to research all this stuff and be prepared to go down whatever rabbit holes it takes you.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly the same as me. You have to be open-minded and skeptical at the same time. There's a balance point between the two. That for me is the way that to research something. And it was exactly the same. I mean, you open one door, it leads to another door, and then it's just, are you courageous enough to keep going with all the cognitive dissonance and all the conditioning that we have to stop us going there? And for me,
Right.
I'm just like, I'm going there. That's just how I am as a person. I'm sure you're
Yeah,
the same.
me too.
Just I don't care what anyone's told me. I'm going to look at it. Especially
Mm.
if you tell me not to look at it, if you say it's, if you're writing off, that tells me I have to go for it. That's just my mindset. I'm sure it's
There
your.
you go. There you go. It was my dad that got me into the books of David Icke, and I think
Mm,
I've got part of his character because
mm,
uh, often my mum will joke about him, and she'll say, if you tell him not to do something, he'll do the opposite. So
mm.
if they're out driving and she says, "Oh, you're driving a bit fast," he'll drive even faster.
Yeah.
So, and that's a bit like me. If you say, "Don't look at this," whatever you
Mm.
do, don't look at this. I'm looking.
Absolutely. Yeah. And not just that, but just on the news, whatever they tell me on the news, I will actually do the complete opposite. And I think you'd
Right.
be in good health if you did that. If everyone did that, you'd probably be in a good place. Um,
Exactly. Stay
because
indoors. Oh, I'm going out for eight
exactly.
hours every day.
Yeah, exactly. Because it is that, which we might come on to, there's an inversion there. You can call it satanic inversion, but it's that thing about flipping everything 180, flipping everything on its head, and it's anti-life. A lot of these movements, a lot of these cults, what they want to do is take everything that is here. You could say created if you want. You could say as a god if you want to go down that path, but they want to flip it on its head and turn it into darkness, turn it to anti-life, anti-nature, and we see that in many different areas, don't we?
Yeah, that's what they do. It's a satanically inverted society where if you want the truth of any situation, best advice is usually to look in the 180-degree opposite direction, and you stand a chance of discovering it there. So, the evening news, you turn on BBC or Fox News or whatever it may be, and you think you're getting the truth of what's actually happening in the world, or people that believe the news do. Then you'll go and watch a movie in the cinema, and you think it's wild fantasy, imagination, and escapism. What you don't realize is that the opposite is the truth. So the news is giving you the wild fantasy and imagination, and the movies and the TV shows and the music videos are where you're finding the truth of what really goes on in the world and who really runs things embedded into the narrative. They do it cryptically, they do it in coded form, in symbolic form, but it's their way of communicating what's really going on. And they see the masses, the populace, the general people out there like you and me, they lump us all in together. They see us as spiritually profane and ignorant, and they think we're too dumb to realize what they're communicating to us. But I tell you what, there's a great many people now who are getting very symbol literate, and they're getting very familiar with the tactics and the methods that these Satanists and occultists have been using for decades or centuries. And the old tricks aren't working like they used to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's the entertainment industry, isn't it? I mean, I was just watching I watched a film last night because when in the comments section someone reminded me to watch it. Return to Oz is an interesting one. It's obviously a Disney, and we can talk about Disney as well. But I actually believe that this movie is referring to, it's pointing to MK Ultra mind control programming. And in the movie, Dorothy Gale, she's taken to a psych ward, she's strapped onto a bed, she's wheeled into a room, and then in the room there's Dr. Worley, and then there's the head nurse. And they put her through, well, she's just about to go through the electric shock treatment, and there's a power cut. And I think that's a little bit misleading. I think where it's implied that she did go through that. And then from that electric shock treatment, she then goes on this adventure, and that's actually referring to that disassociation. We can conclude that because she sees the head nurse as Mombi, the evil witch. She sees the male nurses who wheeled her in as the Wheelers. She sees Dr. Worley, who invented the electric shock treatment, as the King Gnome. She even meets TikTok, who's this sort of lovable mechanical friend she makes along the way. And this is actually referring to the electric shock machine itself, because you see that with certain things such as the turning of the key of TikTok, which is referring to the turning of the key of the electric shock device. And she even sees Jack, the pumpkin head guy, who's actually a pumpkin in her room to begin with. And then she also meets someone called Ozma, who's a girl of a similar age. and she's actually the one that sort of rescues her at the beginning of the movie. But I think that this is actually referring to her alter that's created, and this is something that a lot of the survivors have spoken about, disassociating and creating these different personas, these alters, after being put through this electric shock trauma.
You'd be taken under the park, you'd be put through this programming, and then you'd be hit with a taser. That's one of the common ways of compartmentalizing your memory is a handheld taser. I can remember getting hit with that damn thing from the time I was 6 years old.
Later on, as got older and it got a bit stronger in constitution, as they were doing that sort of testing, there'd be a cattle prod to the elbow, but it's to put you back into the alter state or dissociate.
Disney seems to be the place where all this stuff seems to be, the magic wand, Hollywood, the Hollywood wand, they're cast the TV cast, they're casting these spelling, on the public, aren't they? And then I don't know whether you think it's, done as a form of mockery, it's predictive programming. What do you think? Do you think it's a mixture of all of that? Or do you think they're kind of just readying us up for all this stuff?
It's a bit of all of the above, I would say. There's an
Yeah.
element of satanic morbid mockery because, like I said earlier, they see us as profane. They like to mock us to our faces. But
Yeah.
also, there's this spiritual tenet where they feel the need to place the truth in plain sight. And they feel this somehow gets them off the karmic hook. That's one of the reasons why they do it. I was thinking about what we were going to be talking about on this show in advance of it.
Mm.
And my mind went to Hollywood movies and so many of these great actors that get lauded as the very best in their profession. And it just made me think that probably the reason why certain individuals are hailed as amazing actors who really get inside their roles in a very major way comes down to the fact that they're under mind control. We could think of somebody like Johnny Depp, for example, who I think would be a good example. You often hear it said, oh, Johnny Depp really gets inside his characters and he really becomes them. And the same thing was said about Robert De Niro back in the day when he first got started. He would really just become the people that he was playing. And maybe there's an element of dissociation going on there. Maybe they're slipping into these alternate personalities as a result of having been mind controlled themselves. Roseanne Barr, the actress, has spoken so much about how MK Ultra is prevalent throughout Hollywood.
And it's a big culture of mind control too. MK Ultra mind control rules in Hollywood. If you don't know, Google that and look into it.
I noticed your show is called Raising the Bar, which is similar to Roseanne Barr, which is kind of ironic. But yeah, she said that MK Ultra is everywhere in Hollywood. So it will be the case that so many famous household name actors will have been through this.
That's the mind control program you're under, Bill.
MK Ultra?
Yeah.
The same way that singers and musicians are. I was also thinking about Lindsay Lohan because you often hear about these celebrities that go a bit crazy. And in the music world, Britney Spears is used as a great example of somebody who just seems to act crazy. Kanye West is another example. And this won't be down to the pressures of fame, which is what a lot of people think. They think, oh, Lindsay Lohan goes running around acting all mad because, that's just what Hollywood does to you. It's just what being famous does to you. No, that's what Satanic Ritual Abuse and MK Ultra does to you. I can't prove that any of these individuals have been through that, but it's a fairly safe bet that they have based on the evidence that is available to us. So I was just thinking about Lindsay Lohan because she's often going into rehab, so we're told. And people think that rehab is all about alcohol addiction or drug addiction, whatever it is. I actually think that rehab, when it's used within entertainment, is a euphemism for going back into the mind control lab to have your programming topped up. And Lindsay Lohan was a child star. I think she was connected to Disney, wasn't she? She came out of Disney, but she was in The Parent Trap very
Right, yeah.
early on when she was a young child. And she was playing both a British girl, she had this very posh sort of society British girl accent, and also an American girl. And she was very convincing in each of the roles. And I feel that that would have been down to the programming that these child stars receive, many of them. And they do literally become these roles that they're portraying because these are alters, these are personalities, these are aspects of their minds which have been caused by the dissociation from reality that comes from trauma-based mind control programming. What
Yeah,
do you think about
absolutely. And the singers as well. I think Beyonce talks about she channels a altar. Um,
Sasha Fierce? Yeah.
that's it. Yeah, and even uh, Deontay Wilder, he says he channels the bronze bomber. Who knows whether that could be something or not? I mean, it could just be a kind of a loose way of saying that they go into their kind of power. But who knows? From what I've known from speaking to a lot of survivors, is they've explained it quite well. Is that I mean, you know this as well, but I'll just kind of, for the audience's sake, just briefly, just to kind of get everyone up to speed, is that at generally before the age of 3 as well. That's what I've noticed with a lot of these survivors. They have to have their mind fractured at a very early age, and as it fractures, if like a honeycomb structure within the different compartments is where the different altars come in, and some of those altars are then programmed with trigger words, hypnotic language. A lot of kind of Wizard of Oz terms are used as well. So over the rainbow is used quite a lot. That's another one. Yellow, follow the yellow brick road. This is what to flip them into that altar. And then I've spoken to people that have become assassins. I know you've mentioned this before, but the beta sex kitten programming where they become sex slaves, and then they can also be used to, corrupt other officials with blackmail. So sleeping with people and then also obtaining information. They develop a lot of psychic ability, so photographic memory, kind of clairvoyance, remote viewing, that kind of stuff as well, because they're also tortured as they get older. They're put back into that altar with electric shock treatment. So as I mentioned before, Return to Oz, they're kind of telling you with the electric shock treatment because it throws you out your body. You go into that altar, and so that's kind of how it's done. And so I do, yeah, I believe that Mickey Mouse Club, I think, was probably that as well. I've spoken to two people now that said that goes on underneath the Disney parks. They're killing people and they're actually training and grooming those children who are mind controlled to kill other children that have been kidnapped as well, that are kept underneath the Disney parks in cages. And so they're actually trained to kill these people before they get sent out to do high profile hit jobs as well. So I've actually spoken to someone who's killed, over 21 people as a CIA asset. And so it's all connected to the CIA as well, the military industrial complex. And they train these kids. They are part of a bloodline, as far as I'm aware. They're kind of born into that. And some speak out, some, just go along with it and they become, and they then raise their own children through this. Is this all kind of, would you say it's similar to your research as well, Mark?
Yeah, all this stuff has come across my agenda. I've spoken to a guy named Jay Parker. Maybe you know of him.
Okay.
He speaks about having come from a satanic bloodline family,
Mm.
where each new generation of this family is entrained in these certain ritualistic practices, and they're just expected to uh, carry out the same harm and abuse on their own offspring. And so it just continues. But Jay Parker, he's in America. I think he's in Delaware. And he was raised in a particular neighborhood there, a town, which he said is just full of Satanists. The whole town is just built on Satanism. And his parents were part of this cult, and he was ritually abused. But he managed to break his programming with the use of a witch. I think he says this witch was trying to like step up the next level of his programming, and she unwittingly used a trigger phrase, which caused his programming to break down. So he could see through it, and his, innate humanity started to bleed through the programming. And since then, he's been podcasting and doing shows and talks and stuff, exposing this subject and what really goes on. They do tell you in movies and TV shows what happens as well. So one that I've mentioned quite a lot in my talks is a film from the 1970s called Telephone. It starred Charles Bronson. It had Donald Pleasance in it. And Bronson, and I think it was Lee Remick, is in that movie. They're like Manchurian Candidate style assassins. And Donald Pleasance is the handler. And he delivers these trigger phrases by means of telephone calls, hence the title Telephone. And you see what happens to these people. They just get this phrase read to them over the phone, and immediately they just dissociate and go into this alternate personality and become killers.
The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep. Remember, Soboleth, miles to go before you sleep.
Remember, Sobolev, miles to go before I sleep.
So it was right there in that movie. And then more recently, the Netflix TV show Stranger Things is one that really caught my attention. I'm not really a fan of TV shows. I don't really watch TV at all, but somebody put me onto this show when I came to realize that it's about MK Ultra mind control. So I don't know if you've seen this one, but it's set in like an MK Ultra lab, or certain scenes from it are. And the creators of that series, the Duffer brothers, uh, Ross and Matt Duffer, I think their names are, were originally going to call that show Montauk because it was going to be based on the Montauk Project on Montauk Point, Long Island. There's a military base there called Camp Hero, where many of these types of experiments took place on children. And there's a survivor of that program by the name of Stuart Swerdlow. Don't know if you've come across him.
Yeah.
But he's spoken of how he was programmed at Montauk Point as a child. And he says he's pretty much the only survivor of that program because most of the kids died. And they were trained in psychic abilities and developing things like telekinesis and remote viewing so that this could be weaponized and all kinds of experimentation could be carried out around it. So it's very interesting to me that Stranger Things is based on what actually happened there. And the central character in this show, played by Millie Bobby Brown, is a character known as 11, which is shortened to L. She's just given this code name. And she's been raised in this mind control lab all her life because her mother volunteered herself for MK Ultra drug experimentation using LSD, not realizing what she was signing herself up for, a life of slavery. And then her child was basically stolen from her and raised in one of these labs. And you got the character Dr. Martin Brenner, played by the actor Matthew Modine. And he's very clearly based on Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron, one of the most notorious MK Ultra doctors who worked out of McGill University in Montreal, Canada, on the MK Ultra program. So there's a lot of truth in this TV series. Again, just placing the truth in plain sight, which is what they like to do, dressing it up as entertainment. But they're actually telling you about what so many children would have gone through as part of this totally immoral program. And that's why it had to be off the books. It became a black ops thing because there's no way it could officially operate beyond the 1970s, which is when we were told MK Ultra was officially wrapped up. But I'm not buying that. I think it's far more likely that it simply went underground, off the books, and if anything, got stepped up all the more.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's still going on as far as I'm aware from talking to all these survivors. I mean, it's just gone underground. It's just hidden better. That's all that's happened. And then there's also the blackmail element as well. So when some of these people are forced to do these heinous things, it's filmed everywhere. The kind of the rooms are bugged. They're all, everything's filmed. And then that's then used as blackmail. And then they're shown it later on and they're told, look, we'll put you into these positions of power. But you better do what we say. And if they go against the script, then they're shown the videos of the acts that they were forced to, get involved with. I'm not sure whether it's 100% of these, the world leaders, politicians, whether they're all bloodlines, or whether you get a few that slip through the net and are, let's just say, normal, for want of a better phrase, and they are corrupted to then, get into those positions. I think there is a small percentage of those people who don't start off as bloodlines, but then they are, they go along with it. A little bit like in the movie They Live, when they kind of half, some of the people have the face, but when they actually go to the studio and they kind of infiltrate, there are some humans in there that are just going along with it for the money.
Do it to your own kind.
What's the threat? We all sell out every day. Might as well be on the winning team.
I think that is also the case as well. I'd like to know your opinion on that. But I know you've mentioned in your talks that, you don't get into this unless you're part of the club. But I do think as well that the few have just made it from talent, and they can see that these people have got talent. We can make a lot of money from the talent, and then they're asked to go along with it. And then they might go like that, and then they're maybe bumped off or whatever. I think Amy Winehouse might be an example of that, because I know a friend of mine grew up with her, so, and also another friend of mine, him and his pal were rappers from Scotland, but they just kept getting rejected every time they performed because of their thick Scottish accents. So they actually decided to put on these Californian accents, made up this backstory that they were friends of Eminem, and in the end they got signed by Sony, and they're actually hailed as the next big thing at one point.
So, were you guys from planet Zordon? Yeah. Really, I can tell.
We were adopted by aliens when we were kids.
What about really?
I'm Gavin Bain. I'm not Brains McLeod. I'm not American. I'm Scottish. I've never been in America.
And in the end, they just couldn't keep it going, and then they, they kind of went off. But so, what's your opinion on that? I mean, would we agree that I would say a lot, if not most, are in the club, but there are obviously some that they can make money from, and they work their way into it.
Yeah, just before I answer that, just picking up on your anecdote there about the Scottish Eminem.
Yeah.
Because we're dealing with some dark subject matter in this show, I think, a few moments of humor could be quite good. And I'm just reminded of the story of George Lazenby, the actor that played James Bond just the once in On Her Majesty's Secret Service in 1969. So he was an Australian. And when Sean Connery announced that he was leaving the James Bond series after You Only Live Twice, the producers put out an ad for a new James Bond. They said, we're trying to recruit a new actor to play this role. And Lazenby was in London at the time, and he hadn't done any acting at all besides being in a couple of commercials for Fry's chocolate bars. And he thought to himself, let me just see if I can blag this just for fun, just for a laugh. So he went along to the audition with a fake CV, and he said, I've been in this film and I've done that TV show. And the producers didn't bother to check. They just took him at his word, and they liked him, and they said, okay, you've got the gig. And he came out of the meeting, he was like, shit, I'm James Bond. What do I do now? I just love that. That's a great example of blagging your way into a job.
Did he pretend to be British the whole time though, or did he just put on the act? Do you know if he put on the accent for the casting?
I don't know. He's got a bit of a strange accent in the film because he's trying to disguise his Australian accent. So I don't know if he did that in the meeting, but it's a great story about blagging your way. Anyway, to answer your point, you were talking about. Actually, I've spent so long on that anecdote, I've forgotten what you asked.
No, it was about I was saying they're not all part of the club. I think some make it through, and then they are, because some obviously have talent. They know we can make money from this person. They might make money from the underground scene, with the music scene. So and then they think we can capitalize on this person. Or do you just think they're all, everyone 100% are in the club? Or what's your opinion on that?
There are different ways to get into it, and I often get asked this question. And I believe that one way is to be born into the right bloodline family, because so much of what we're talking about here comes down to families, ancestry, DNA, genealogy. Funnily enough, in that James Bond movie that I just mentioned, On Her Majesty's, part of the plot involves Blofeld, the master villain, who's portrayed by Telly Savalas in this one, trying to retrace his own ancestry. And it's all about heraldry and, peerage, nobility, all this kind of thing. And it's like Ian Fleming, who wrote the book, knew only too well the importance that's placed on certain bloodline families. And that's the key to why certain people become famous and successful, whether it's in the world of politics or whether it's as an actor or a musician or a TV presenter, whatever it may be. Any role that's in the public eye, in so many cases, you'll find that it's new generations of certain families that have been deemed important that are ushered into these roles. So they're literally born into it. And they're groomed for it from an early age. So it'll be decided in their childhood whether they're going to be a famous musician or a famous actor. And then they go off and get the very best training at foundations and institutions to bring out the very best actors, the very best guitarists, the very best producers, whatever it may be. Because money's no object, they don't have to worry about whether they can afford the training. It's just there for them. And then another way to get in, and I'm sure it's the same in the world of film, as it is in the world of music, is simply to show that you want it enough. So there will be talent spotters whose job it is to keep an eye on those who are showing some promise in terms of natural skill and ability, whether it's in music or acting or whatever. And then they'll be approached and they'll be tested. They might be invited to a meeting. They might be invited to one of these crazy parties where all kinds of wild stuff goes on, and it will be judged as to what they're prepared to do, how much they're prepared to debase their morals in exchange for the fame and fortune. And there'll be some absolute psychopaths and sociopaths and narcissists out there who are prepared to do pretty much anything for fame. And they're exactly the sort of people that these occult controllers want on their books. And then there'll come a point where they're going to sign a contract. And I hear stories about people signing contracts in their own blood as a very real thing. And once you've signed that contract, that's it. Your ass is owned from that point on. And when you've been to enough of these parties, they will have filmed you, as you mentioned. That stuff gets kept on record, and it's there as leverage, as blackmail, should it ever be needed, should any of these people ever decide to go off script or become a whistleblower and try and tell others about what they've become involved with. That's there to ensure that they don't. And I was thinking only this morning, I was going back over the story of Michael Jackson and what we were told about him. There were 2 cases brought against him where it was alleged that he was into pedophilic activity. I personally don't buy that that was the case. I think what happened to him was a classic example of a reminder coming from these very powerful controllers of just what they can do to somebody if they piss them off in some way. So Michael Jackson, I believe, was mind controlled, in keeping with the theme of what we're talking about. He ticks all the boxes for having undergone trauma-based mind control from a very early age in childhood. We saw many examples of his programming apparently breaking down and aspects of his real personality bleeding through. And he became very outspoken. He was outspoken about his record label Sony and the true nature of the deal that artists enter into with their record labels. And he wasn't particularly complimentary about Sony, about Tommy Mottola, the one-time boss of Sony, who was Mariah Carey's husband for a short while, slash handler. And he had some other stuff to say about the history books having been altered and all this stuff. So you can see why Michael Jackson wouldn't exactly have ingratiated himself to the control system, and why they might want to send a couple of warning shots to remind him of what they can do to him, to destroy his career, to destroy his public reputation. And I think that's what happened. So there was that first case in, what was it, the early 90s, which eventually got dismissed. And then there was another case which got brought against him later on. And they were trying to portray within the mindset of the general public the idea that Michael Jackson is into children in a very unhealthy way. And I personally just don't buy it. I think Michael was somebody who was starting to break his programming and was trying to warn people about it in whatever ways he could, and he had to be dealt with.
Yeah, I agree with that. Actually, I've said that before. I think that the ones that are paedophiles they die paedophiles. You know, Jimmy Savile, for instance, they get protected to the moment they die. The ones that they seem to vilify whilst they're still alive, that tells me that they've gone off script a little bit. Even if you look at Michael Jackson's music, it started off bad, smooth criminal, speed demon, and then it went to heal the world. It doesn't matter if you're black or white, you know, these kinds of songs. So he's clearly trying to use his status and his platform to kind of move it into a different direction. I can't imagine these kind of satanic record labels were best pleased of him sort of saying, you know, unite the sexes, unite the the races, and all come together. I'm sure that's not really in their plans, is it?
Yeah, they just want him singing about Beat It and stuff like that.
Yeah, Beat It. God, yeah. You look back on it, so you don't think about it until you kind of review it. You know, you reflect on it and you kind of look at all those song titles.
Well, yeah, if you look at the video to Beat It, it takes on a rather different connotation to the surface narrative of the song as we think of it. And I'm sure he would have been coerced into doing things like that, because these artists are, you know, they're told to put certain themes into their songs and videos. And they're told to flash up certain symbolism, which is why you see artists doing the one eye and holding up their hands in the 666 or the Baphomet sign, the horned hand, or doing the pyramid, the triangle of manifestation, because they're just instructed to do it. These are methods of occult signaling. But I think some artists get wise to this and they no longer want to be a part of it. Another obvious one would be Prince, in my view. lots of parallels between Prince and Michael Jackson. They had very similar careers. They both went up against their respective record labels. In Prince's case, it was Warner Brothers. And, it didn't end well for either of them if you accept that they passed away at the time that they did. And I know the jury may be out on that for many people, but Prince, again, ticks all the boxes for having undergone mind control himself. And we even get that in the movie Purple Rain, biopic, which is basically charting Prince's life. So he plays this character called the Kid, but he's basically playing himself. And we see that he's in an abusive relationship with his father, and he comes from a very troubled, broken home. And that would have been the case with Prince actually in real life. And the same thing with Michael Jackson. And this has a bearing on how they turn out. But also, another thing to mention is the phenomenal talent that both of those guys had. Michael Jackson's dance moves, allegedly inspired by James Brown. He was an amazing performer, and Prince, a multi-instrumentalist, absolute creative genius. How many instruments could that guy play? And he could act and he could sing. It's just amazing. And I just wonder whether a regular person from a regular walk of life is actually capable of that amount of talent. I actually think in many cases, it's the mind control that brings out the talent, because to escape the trauma and all the horrors that are happening to them, these people go into these different altars and use it to distract themselves from what they've been through. Darren Brown has actually talked about this as well. I suspect Darren Brown of having been through sort of MK Ultra style programming himself. I think he's also probably an asset of British military intelligence.
Wow.
He's a very creepy, unsettling guy, but he is a fascinating guy to listen to. And I remember in one of his shows, he spoke about, he did this trick where he had a jar of buttons, and there were loads and loads of buttons in this jar. And he asked a volunteer on this show to smack him around the face. He says, no, harder, harder. Smacks him again. He goes, harder, harder. Really hurt me. Smack me hard. Smacks him really, really hard. And he, within like 2 seconds, he'd told how many buttons there were on the table. Then they count the buttons, and he's like 2 out. And that's because he used the counting of the buttons as a distraction technique to forget about the pain that he was going through. And I think that's quite telling, because I think that will tie into other things that he would have been through in his life. And it probably happens with many of these other performers as well. So they become amazing singers, dancers, actors to distract themselves from the pain and the trauma and the turmoil that they've been through in their troubled lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because there's that, when that pain comes in, when it first comes in under that kind of trauma-based mind control, they have to kind of get out their bodies. They're disassociating. They're literally coming out of their bodies, and then they kind of form a new character out of that.
I'm sure it goes much further than we realize.
Yeah.
So many musicians have alter egos. I mean, Bono has this sort of satanic one. I think it's called Mephisto, where he sometimes goes on stage with devil horns. He literally looks like a friggin' demon. Which tells you a lot about Bono and his true nature. But so many of these artists do. Beyonce's got Sasha Fierce, as we said. Eminem is Slim Shady. Lady Gaga had this male alter ego called Victor Calderon. Nicki Minaj is known as Barbie, and she had this alter ego called Roman Zelensky. And at the 2012 Grammy Awards, which is where Whitney Houston died in a bizarre ritual, this Roman Zelensky character was exorcised from Nicki Minaj by a bunch of guys dressed up as Catholic priests. It was all a stage act, but it makes you wonder how real it might have been as well. So many of these musicians have these alter egos. And just talking about these almost supernatural abilities and just these great abilities to do different things, I'm reminded of the Bourne movies starring Matt Damon, which was all about the CIA's MK Ultra and the creation of Manchurian Candidate style assassins. And Jason Bourne is this sort of super soldier in some aspects, where he's got these amazing physical abilities and he can withstand pain. And that's what a lot of this training is to do with, creating these so-called super soldiers. Stuart Swerdlow spoke about this as well, where they're impervious to pain. They don't need sleep. They don't need to eat for long periods, so they're ideal for carrying out missions and assassinations and things like that. But in one of these Bourne movies, I seem to recall that he learned a foreign language, as far as I can remember. So he gets this like manual or phrase book, and he is able to absorb it within just a few minutes. And then he emerges from that able to speak a new language. Anyone else, it would take months and months and months of going to night school. But these guys, because of the compartments of their minds that have been opened up, are able to take on these amazing abilities. So they can learn a new language literally in minutes, and new skills and all kinds of things. So if you were a psychopathic satanic controller and you had zero morals, you can see why you would want people like this as your assets on your books, whether it's as actors, musicians, assassins, whatever it may be, because they're capable of things that the average individual just isn't. So it makes you ideal.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sleepers as well, I've heard, is a name for that, which kind of ties in probably to the fact they don't sleep, but super soldiers, sleepers, yeah. They're used as assassins. Yeah, the Bourne series is kind of giving that away, isn't it? How they're trained. And I spoke to JR, and he was one of those. You know, he was trained to be an assassin, and he went on to kill, you know, some high profile people. And yeah, all from childhood, going, you know, being put into the altars, and only now, really, after, I think he said after the age of 25, 30, start to piece it all back together. That's what also normally happens, is it takes a while for them to, you know, get one piece of the jigsaw coming, and then another one, and they start to build up a bit of a picture of it. So yeah, it's yeah.
Are you familiar with Ole Damagard? Do you know that
I'm not
guy?
actually. Who's that, Mark?
He's Danish, but he spent a lot of time in Sweden, and then he moved to Spain, and he now lives in Bali. He's a friend of mine. I've known him for many years. He's a researcher into political assassinations. That's his speciality. And assassinations of famous people like John Lennon and Bob Marley and you know, the Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme and many others. And he's looked into the Kennedy assassination, JFK event of 1963. And through his research, Ule has come into contact with this guy who claims to have been one of the shooters at the JFK event. He was a young guy at the time working for the American military. He's in his 80s now, I think. And he says that that day there was a team that was hired to take JFK out. So it wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald in the book depository with a single rifle. You know, it was a coordinated team. There's a bunch of assassins, a group of assassins known as Operation 40, which Ule has talked about many times. And this guy that he's in contact with, I forget his name. Yeah, it's just not coming to me at the moment. But he says that Files, James Files, that's it, James Files. He says that there were a couple of other guys on the day that were supposed to take out JFK. And at the very last minute, they got the wobbles, got cold feet, and just didn't want to be a part of it. So he says he was called on to step in at the 11th hour and become one of these assassins. And he's evidently trying to atone for what he did. So now, late in life, he's coming clean about what he was involved with, and he's seeking redemption of some sort, I guess, before he shuffles off. And so he's done some interviews with Ule where he's spoken about this thing. But it just brings to light this world of assassins who are hired to, you know, perform events such as that.
Yeah.
And that can only happen under mind control, I think. You know, that these are mind control operations, and this would be another offshoot or sub project of MK Ultra, I would suggest.
Absolutely. I was wanting to know, is it possible to get your opinion on the John Lennon assassination? You know, because I think, you know, was it Mark Chapman? Do you think he was mind controlled, or was it him? And I also wanted to ask you, you know, you've mentioned before, and I've kind of gone down this path as well of, like, you know, they have doubles and they have, you know, the whole Paul Fall, Billy Shears stuff as well. But do you think that actually was the 1.0 John Lennon, or the 2.0? And do you think that was a mind control hit job?
It definitely was an MK Ultra job. Funnily enough, I was outside the Dakota building in New York just last week. I was in America, and I got some photos taken at the very spot where John Lennon is said to have been shot, or very close to it. And the movie Rosemary's Baby was set in that building as well, the Dakota. And right about the spot where I was stood is where, in the plot of the movie, a young woman falls to her death from an upstairs window. And parked right outside the Dakota at that point was a white Volkswagen Beetle, similar to the one that appears on the sleeve of the Beatles' Abbey Road sleeve, and it becomes splattered with blood. And there's so many synchronistic connections between that movie Rosemary's Baby and the Beatles. It's just uncanny, like supernatural forces are causing all this stuff to happen. But with the John Lennon assassination, it's clear that Mark Chapman was MK Ultra'd, I would say. It's not clear whether he was the actual assassin. And I think, from having looked at this event extensively and looked at many other researchers' work as well, I think it's quite possible that Chapman was programmed to believe that he had shot Lennon and to be the patsy or the fall guy for it. So he would end up going to jail if he's really in jail. Some people doubt whether he is, but it would deflect attention from the real killer or killers. And when you get into the John Lennon story, the name Jose Perdomo keeps coming up. According to Ule Damagard, who I just mentioned, Jose Perdomo was an assassin who was part of the CIA's Operation 40 program. He was involved in the Bay of Pigs operation in Cuba, and he was hired to be the assassin of John Lennon, posing as the doorman at the Dakota building that night. Certainly, there was a Jose Perdomo working as the doorman of the Dakota on that fateful night, but there does seem to be some doubt over whether it's the same character as this Operation 40 assassin, or whether it's a different guy simply with the same name. So it's muddy waters, it's very murky. And I do think that Chapman, though, was programmed to assume a marksman's position. And so witnesses would see him as apparently having shot Lennon. But really, the shots came from elsewhere. So it's diversion, just like it was in the JFK story.
I was going to say, whether it was Lee Harvey Oswald, obviously, and then he probably kind of tried to speak out, and then he was shot by, I think, like Jack Ruby, and they're sort of trying to like kill the person to kill the, it's like a knock-on effect of trying to cover it up, right?
Yeah. Well, Lee Harvey Oswald had a girlfriend who goes by the name of Judith Very Baker. She's still alive. And she has been very vocal about the nature of her relationship with Lee Oswald. And she says that absolutely he didn't kill Kennedy and he was stitched up for it. And actually, he was trying to save Kennedy's life. He was on Kennedy's side. But the powers that be saw to it that he was the fall guy, he was the patsy, and he was taken out. She's got a book called Me and Lee. And she just goes into this whole thing. It's a massive book. And she's appeared at conferences in recent years. I've met her a few times. She also speaks to Ule Damagard regularly about that event. So Oswald was the fall guy, and we get that in many of these events. As to whether that was actually Lennon, I know that many researchers feel that John Lennon was replaced or there were doubles used in the same way as with McCartney. I think it's much more clear-cut with McCartney. It's quite obvious to anyone that approaches that subject area with an open mind that there's been more than one Paul McCartney. We can see this. It's right there in the photographic evidence, the forensic evidence, in video footage. With Lennon, it's a bit more difficult to call, but unfortunately there are a few discrepancies and anomalies in facial shape and the shape of the nose and things like this, and it just leaves me to the reluctant conclusion that we may well be looking at more than one John Lennon as well. So nothing is clear cut in this game. If you're getting into this area of research and you're seeking easy answers, you're going to be very disappointed.
Yeah, absolutely. When I see doubles with Putin, I mean, I don't know if you've noticed that, but there's about 3 or 4 different Vladimir Putins that are
He's
quite
a bit
obvious.
fatter these days.
Yeah. There's like a fat, chubby kind of pound puppy version of him, and then there's more of a sleek version, and there's one with completely different eyes, and so
lay off the donuts, Vladimir.
Exactly. Yeah. Just before we go, I know you're doing some great work, and you're really great to listen to, Mark. I could sit and just listen to you all day. You've got a great communication style. Probably the DJing helped with that as well, maybe. But obviously using that to good use. So
yeah, I think it did. I think we all use the skill sets that we've got to good effect, and certainly years of doing radio shows prepared me for the work that I'm doing now. I used to interview people. I used to interview music artists. I met a few famous ones. I met Beyonce before she became famous, when Destiny's Child had first come out. So I met the whole group in February '98, and they were all 16. and just being groomed for fame. And look at where she is now. You know, she's been partnered off with Jay-Z. Many researchers think that she's demonically possessed. She's certainly pushing satanic agendas. But I met her when she was a very sweet, innocent, naive young 16-year-old, apparently. A very pleasant person. And it's just tragic what these people become. But yeah, I've done interviews and also the gigging, the DJ gigging, you know, just going around from club to club, from country to country, playing DJ gigs and meeting different people, traveling extensively was preparing me for what I'm doing now. I've just traded in playing music for putting across empowering information of this nature, but it's all training, isn't it? One way or the
Yeah,
other.
2020 happened, and that was the real, you know, point at which, you know, everyone has to sort of up their game a little bit, and it kind of moved me into this more. So yeah, I think we've all kind of had that moment where we're shifted up, we're leveling up a little bit, and if we don't do it, kind of the world will force us to level up. I think, you know, that's definitely my experience.
Yeah, you have to do what you can. And a lot of people say to me, oh, I could never do podcasts or radio shows or public speaking. It's just not me. And I have to remind myself that, yes, that's the case. Not everyone is cut out for this because I find it quite easy. You know, it's second nature for me. I can talk about this stuff all day long, and I get up there on stage at conferences and give talks, and it doesn't faze me. I don't never get nervous. I don't really give it a second thought. But I realize that not everyone can do this or wants to do this, in which case there are other contributions you can make. There's all kinds of support roles available for guys like us. We need admin support, right? Every now and again, we might need a website built. We might need some graphics done. We might need a video edited or some subtitles or some music added to it. And there are people out there with these kind of skill sets that can assist us in this type of work. And it's just as vital because we can't do our jobs effectively without that level of support. So those kind of roles are very important. And then if you can't do that, then at least, you know, support guys like us by coming to our events or buying our books or, you know, maybe donating to us. And then there's all kinds of other things. People can become activists. Over the past 3 or 4 years, there's been no shortage of events that people could have gone to voice their opposition to all the tyranny that we've been living under. So there's all kinds of ways that people can get involved. The only important thing is that everyone must do something. You've got to be able to have a clear conscience and be able to make the truthful statement that you did what you could. And if you did all you could, no one can ask any more of you.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, no, and it's such a pleasure to have you on, mate. Such a privilege to have you on. You know, it's such good stuff, and there's a lot of it. Also, kind of emboldens what I'm doing in my research. And when I hear you talk about stuff, it's just, you know, and you get onto it. You feel it. You can connect to it. There's a knowingness when you hear someone talk, and you can vibrate. You can resonate with it. And you know, when I hear you talk, it really helps my own research, and I know I'm on the right path. And that's how I generally do it. I have a bit of a radar for people. It's a discernment where you can feel what's true and what's not, you know. And you know, there's a certain power in the voice when you hear people talk, and so I feel that from you, and it really, you know, helps me on my journey. It's important that people up their game a little bit and feel, you know, if you can speak out, because you never know who that one person that might affect, that they affect exponentially a load of people, and then that's how we do it, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you for those comments. And yeah, it's just a very important thing to keep it all going, and everyone can make a contribution. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic.
And also what you were saying there about many of the things that you've raised, many of the points, many of the names, many of the subject areas are exactly what I've come across in my own research. So we've obviously been down similar paths and fallen down similar rabbit holes. And
Yeah.
it just reminds me of the process of putting together my first book, Musical Truth Volume 1, which I self-published in early 2016. And by that point, it was based on 5 years worth of research into the true nature of the music industry. And I can remember just before I put that book out, just before I went public with it, having a few jitters and just saying to myself, my God, I hope I've got this right. I'm going out on a limb here with some of the stuff I'm saying. I'm calling out mind control in the industry. I'm talking about occult symbolism and ritualistic practices and stuff, satanic, demonic possession and ritual sacrifice and things of this nature. And I was thinking, I hope I've got this right, or I'm finished. You know, I've burnt all my bridges back to my old life. And I put the book out. And what I found virtually from the start was constant validation of everything that was in there. So I had people reaching out to me saying, I worked in the music industry. I was in a boy band. I was due to be signed by a major record label, and they promised us all this fame and fortune and crazy wealth. But something didn't sit right with me about the contract. So I was like, actually, I don't want this. And I walked out. And he said, I've since discovered that had I signed that contract, I'd be into some terrible stuff that I would stand no chance of getting out of. And other people have said I've worked as a producer, as a record label boss, some sort of industry executive, and everything you outline about the industry, the true nature of it, how it really operates is 100% true. Just constant validation. People have messaged me from all over the world and they've said, yes, it's exactly as you say, it is. So at least there's some satisfaction, even though the subject is very dark and I wish the world were very different to the way it is. At least I can be reassured that the information I've put out there is actually accurate and valid.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's great. And that, that's, I have the same sort of thing. When I get more survivors come and find me out after the interviews that I do, and they say they've never spoken before, and then they come out, and then the next one comes in and says, "Oh, thank you, I'm going to come out and talk now." So that's the effect that we're having, that ripple effect, that
How many
domino.
have you spoken to?
I've probably spoken to about 14 survivors. And there's plenty more that are kind of I'm in contact with, but they're not quite ready to speak out as well. And just to finish off here is that these are people from all over the world that don't know each other, and all their stories are consistent. So how could they all conspire with this story and get everything, on detail with each other? It's just not possible. So, that's just it's a logical inquiry here where this is going on and they're just all reporting back on what the same sort of thing they're going through, and it's all connecting from places all over the world here. So that's how I know that there's a truth to this. There's an occultocracy, I call it, that's just right under the surface of society. And I think in the last few years what's happened is it's not that it's getting more dark, it's just the darkness is coming up to the surface like a pus comes up to the surface. It's a natural detoxification of the earth, or humanity, you could say, and it's up to us to be the antibodies to then kind of purge it, and there's a few of us doing that, and then more and more build up as a crescendo, as a tipping point, and then we all kind of get rid of that darkness. I think that's actually what's happening on a, if you want to call it, a spiritual level, and we're seeing that's the great reveal that's kind of corresponding to the great reset that's happening at the moment. There's a sort of law of opposites that's happening. And so you're a part of that. I'm a part of that. Many others are a part of that. This podcast is an example of that. All the other podcasts, interviewing survivors is an expression of that. There's a wave of truth. The truth vibrations are coming through. And so, that's what I think is happening. It's the darkness is coming up to the surface. It's just always been there. It's now visible. 2020 vision is where we're starting to see it.
Right. It's always been there. And if people want a bit of homework to go away and study, I would simply point them towards the music video to a song called Duel, Duel, by Propaganda, German band. So this song is from 1985. You can get the video on YouTube. And in it, you see a direct reference to lifelong trauma-based mind control. So I'll just leave people to watch the video. It's full of symbolism. I know if you've never seen it, you'll spot everything within 4 minutes. You'll see everything that's being conveyed there. But this song came out in 1985. Loads of people would have seen the video. Very, very few would have comprehended what's actually being communicated in it. But now we have different eyes with which to see these things. We're becoming symbol literate. We're learning to spot all these calling cards and little Easter eggs that they place in their videos and stuff, and we're learning to know what it means. So the longer this goes on and the more this begins to snowball exponentially, this knowledge, then the harder it's going to be for them to continue these agendas. They still put their symbolism out there. This is what amazes me.
I don't know why they put it out there, though. That's what I don't understand.
Right.
Why are they still putting it out there for us to find?
Right. I mean, there's so many researchers now that are all over this stuff. The minute they do one of their Grammy shows or US Super Bowl shows, and it's absolutely laden with symbolism, and it's basically an occult ritual or a black mass, there's people all over it calling it out, but they still do it. They obviously feel the need to continue putting this stuff out there. They're either extremely arrogant and so full of hubris that they think they're untouchable and invincible, and they can just do whatever they want and rub our noses in it, or they're getting more and more desperate, and for whatever reason, they're adhering to some sort of religious, spiritual belief system they've got where they feel they have to put this stuff out. But the more we call it out, the more they step it up, right? Just
exactly. Would you mind just telling the audience about how they can find you and if you've got any upcoming, talks or tours you're doing?
Sure. My main hub website is djmarkdevlin.com. So that's like the one-stop shop. There's links from that to my videos, to my various podcasts. I've got a conversation-based podcast called Good Vibrations, excuse me, too many shows. I've got a conscious music showcase called The Sound of Freedom, and I do a weekly soulful house show called The Sound of Now. That's me kind of going into normie world for a couple of hours each week, which is much needed. So that's soulful inspirational house, which I still like to throw down each week. I do many, many talks, conferences, meetup groups. I've got loads coming up, mainly in the UK in the coming weeks. They're all detailed on my site on the events page. Again, djmarkdevlin.com. Go to the events. You can find out what conferences and festivals I'm a part of. I speak at some festivals and I DJ at a few others. I do the odd gig here and there still. Other than that, I've got a whole bunch of podcasts containing interviews and conversations of this nature, which are sitting on my various video channels. I'm on YouTube, BitChute, Odyssey, Rumble, and also Spreaker for the audio. So yeah, there's a lot there, but just head to djmarkdevlin.com and you can get the links to everywhere else.